Hello, and welcome to this lesson dedicated to the permission system, in which we will discuss this third point regarding advanced permission settings. So we will look at how to access the environment, which we have seen before, but we'll review again. We will look at the default groups in SharePoint, which are created as a result of the creation of the SharePoint site, just as the permissions associated with levels establish default permission levels, to which, as with groups, additional levels can be added. Next, we will look at the default permission levels one by one. I will quickly show you an example, as we will review them all one by one. In the sense that SharePoint, by elaborating on one of its entries, this shows us everything that is configured by default for a single permission level, in the sense that SharePoint has already chosen certain options. Then, after reviewing all the permission levels, we will look at how to add a permission level in relation to this default, starting from 0 or from an existing permission level, which can serve as a template to later explore how site collection administration operates. So how is it possible beforehand to identify certain individuals, or how certain Office 365 groups can interact at the site collection level? And next, how to verify the permissions, because it's clear that one can't remember everything by heart. And sometimes it's necessary to see what rights a specific person or group has. Office 365 has been added to a SharePoint group with certain permissions. Perhaps we don't know them by heart, and we want to verify what this person or these individuals can do who are members of this Office 365 group. So let's proceed to the advanced permissions settings in SharePoint. Let's examine the groups and default levels. Then we will review the various default levels. And finally, the last things we observed. So let's head over to SharePoint. Let's click on the gear icon and on the site permissions. And at this point, we will click on the Advanced Permission Settings. And we can see that SharePoint by default has 3 groups: the members, the owners, and the visitors who have editing rights, respectively. Full control and read access. These are the default groups with these permissions. And so if I add someone to an Office 365 group from one of these SharePoint groups, they will automatically and inheritably acquire all the powers assigned to these 3 groups. Then obviously, as we mentioned, we can add groups. In this lesson, we will learn how to add levels, and in the next lesson, we will learn how to add groups. I would like to point out that I added one here, the management control, and I added it for creating the slides. So I was saying that the same principle applies to the permission level. Let's click here to access the permission levels environment. And we see that these are not clickable, that they cannot be selected. These are the default ones offering full control: design, modification, collaboration, and reading. And then these below represent 2 permission levels that I added to create the slides, obviously whether for groups or for permission levels. We are going to create them live to see all the steps dynamically and live on how to accomplish these tasks. That said, shall we dive into the topic before we look at how to insert a new permission level? Let's see how these permission levels are structured. Let's proceed to full control. And in full control, everything is restricted. Why is everything restricted? We cannot revert the name to the title. According to the description, we cannot uncheck anything. So a complete control, which means that on all items from the permissions of the list, from the site permissions, and from personal permissions, which are the 3 macro categories that we find in all levels of permission. In each of these macro categories, all options have been enabled. So here, as you can see, there are all the options. Here, there are all the options. Here, there are all the options. This was put in place by DFAR SharePoint because the one who has this level of access must have full control. Nothing should be prohibited for him in terms of operations on the SharePoint site. So let's go back and let's look at the design level. In the design level, as you can see, you can both remove and add checkboxes. I obviously haven't changed anything at these levels because that's how SharePoint is designed. As for the default permission levels, it is designed so that these permissions are included in each permission level, which are meant to be necessary to specific individuals to create, modify, or just read to have complete control. So in my view, Office 365 states that these are the capabilities that a person who needs to have only read access should have. The one who needs to modify and the one who must design, I believe, must have this one and not the other. For example, in the case of SharePoint design, I think the one who needs to design the site, he should have all the necessary permissions, and so he must clearly be able to create a list. So in relation to the other one, it should only have this one, where I ticked off. Now, without analyzing them individually, what you can do by reviewing again the slides. Because there are all the screenshots, so what is the concept? It is about assigning to people the minimum authority necessary to accomplish their work. Thus, SharePoint, in this case, both in design as well as in other levels of default authorization. I think this is what a responsible person needs for design. I'm not going to give it to him the other powers that he needs. The same goes, of course, for all these other levels by default. Let's take a look at the modification. Here in the modification, there is already something different if you notice in this first block of authorization. There's no check here nor here, whereas in the design, there was a check here and here. That is to say, he could also approve the elements, those that were part of this authorization level. So approve a secondary version of a list item or of a document. This ignores the behaviors of the list, cancels the extraction or archives an extracted document. Thus, canceling the extraction means that the document becomes available again for editing. For example, a modified SharePoint page only saves the draft. Site visitors do not see the changes because it has been checked out. As long as I do not click on Publish, I will not be able to see him again. Here, those who need to modify do not need this power either. According to Office 365, because they only modify, they are not the ones who design and therefore do not have to perform many operations in the pages and the web parts. But nothing prevents us from checking this box too. We can certainly check this box and go down here to send the modification to the system. Thus, those who are part of this authorization level will also have this power. What does Office 365 suggest to us? You can find it in all Office 365 guides, mainly in Microsoft support. It advises us not to modify these authorization levels by default, which are evidently studied scientifically by Microsoft. And therefore, they have been established in this manner, in a scientific manner, obviously relying on the operation of corporate work. Therefore, do not alter them. It's better not to modify them. So, if I want to create a particular level of authorization with specific powers, I will, as I did in this case, to create levels of additional authorization regarding those who are already there by default. So let's also explore collaboration. We will also discover various elements provided by Office 365. For instance, the management of lists. Here, those who just need to collaborate did not check the management of lists. They didn't even put it regarding the extraction on the approval of items like before. And here something is different. Let's examine the last level of default authorization, that is, reading, which will be different again. Here, the management of lists, extraction, adds elements. modifies elements, removes elements, approves the items, deletes the versions that should have only the right to read. It does not need to have all these permissions. On the contrary, it should not have them. Therefore, SharePoint here by default, he says that if you give this power to a group, it is automatically configured this way. And I recommend you not to change it. Instead, you will create your levels of authorization separated from these other levels and to the group that you're going to create in relation to those by default. You will assign these levels of authorization, create specially. So let's see now how to create from scratch an authorization level. And then we will see how to create it from an existing level of existing authorization, which, as I mentioned earlier, can serve as a template. So let's start by creating an authorization level from scratch. So without starting from an existing one, let's click here to add an authorization level. And first of all, let's give a name of identification of our level, and we will call it Operation on Lists. So there is a possibility. Let's write something which identifies this level in a slightly more specific way. Possibility to intervene on the data lists. So here I could select everything. I will select everything in the three main categories: list permission, site permission, and personal authorization. So let's also take a look at the allocation criteria of powers at a certain level of authorization that we will then assign to a group of users. It is certain that this concerns those who have to manage the lists. They need all these permissions for the lists. So if he must manage them from A to Z, all these permissions are essential. Let's check all the permissions. So opening the items and display, deletion, creating an alert. I could also say, for example, yes, everything, but not the creation of alerts. I do not want to allow those who will follow part of the group to whom this level is assigned, must not be able to create notifications. The rest can do everything. Certainly, these are people who need to work on the lists. They won't really need to have an authorization on site. If they have to work on the lists, they must not be able to affect the modification of the pages regarding the site's closure, regarding the invitation of members to the site. He will definitely need to view the pages. Indeed, SharePoint has set this as default. And also the opening, to open a site, a list, a folder to access the elements included in this container. It's also a capability that will be useful to him. In other words, when I check these boxes, SharePoint suggested to me to also assign these items. That is to say that if I delete them, they also remove all of them from me, all of those up there regarding the permissions from the list, because they are closely related. Like when I select List Management, the display of lists also displays immediately. It is obvious that it is an included feature. So let's go again to check all these boxes. As you can see here, it has automatically reset the visualization of the opening page. Down here, regarding personal permissions, we will not select any other option from this list, site authorization and individual authorization, because the person who must manage the lists, he does not need to also have these authorizations if he must manage only the lists. As it has been said, it is a general principle, the one based on which is not given additional authorization, compared to those that are necessary for work. First of all, because people could access content to features that they must not access, and also to avoid complicating management. So after establishing everything it can do, this level of authorization, which we have named List Operations, let's click on Create. And after clicking on Create, here are the operations that appear on the lists in the list of our permission levels, that later, when we create the groups, we will be able to assign to a group. I wanted to start by, as previously mentioned, to also show you how to create a permission level based on an existing level. So I will recreate this Read and Alert level that I included in the slides. So let's get started with an existing template. which can be a default template or one of those that we have created. I start from the template default reading template where SharePoint has placed the boxes already on all of this that they consider appropriate to offer people who will have this level of authorization. I am going down here and I click on Copy the Authorization Level. I will name it. So it has now copied for me, fully copied, the reading level. I write more reviews. And here we draft reading rights and alert management. That is to say, I take this model that provided the reading rights by default and SharePoint. I also want to add alert management. So I will go here in the site permissions, and I also check the alert management. Here I have added an additional item. They can add others, or rather than adding something, I can go withdraw powers. At this authorization level of reading, I can say this. For example, I do not want you to see the items. So I'm going to create the authorization level that I want to have to obviously keep in mind when I assign it later, this level of authorization to a SharePoint group. After completing the operations, I will click on Create, and even in this case, I will have the new level of authorization, which is called Reading More Alerts inside, which I know very well what's there. Let's return to the home page and let's take a look. The administration of the collection of sites. So we need to examine the management of the collection of the sites and the verification of the powers of the authorizations. So let's click on the wheel Site Permission. Let's return to the home page of the advanced settings and let's click here on Collection Administrator of Sites. Now, Collection Administrator of Sites. What is it about? This concerns those who can manage the collection of different sites. So not just this site. Training course, from which we entered the interface of this advanced setting, but can manage all sites of the Office 365 account, including SISHI. I have to be careful to whom to grant power of attorney. I am here to make the slides. I have inserted Cristina Bianchi, Roberto Rossi. Then I also inserted the owners of training courses. The owners are those who created the eSharePoint. Those to whom the creators have given are granted the power to be owners, that is, the members who have been elevated to the status of owners. And then I have also added a full suite of Office 365, which is the Cardiology Congress, of course, with all the members who are involved, which means that all these individuals, such as Cristina Bianchi and Roberto Rossi, all group members, Office 365 Cardiology Conference, and all the stakeholders of the training course website are administrators of the ZIT collection. So all members who are part of these groups, as well as Cristina Bianchi and Roberto Rossi, will be able to serve as administrators of the site collection. This also means that if I, in the SharePoint site training course, an owner, then tomorrow I will reduce it. A simple member, obviously, he will lose that power. So without coming back here, obviously, I can handle it to add more people. I can add another person whom I know to be in the Office account. Let's also include 365, William. Among those who can be administrators about the ZIT collection, and I'm going to click on OK. Obviously now, I have updated the list of administrators of the ZT collection. Then I was saying one last thing, the verification of permissions. I didn't always say we can remember regarding the permissions that we provided to specific individuals or an Office 365 group, including 100 groups of people who can then join a group. SharePoint, from here we will check just the person that we just inserted, and we click on verification. Here we are, shows all the permissions that this person has of this person. Obviously, barely having my SOCOM administrators from the ZIT collection, as we can see, has a lot of permissions. Cristina Bianchi, Sales Director, verification as well. Cristina Bianchi has many permissions, as we can see from this screen. Here's how we did it for 2 Office users, 365 SharePoint site documents. We will be able to do for any other group user. So we also concluded this subject, and we concluded this additional 3rd lesson on SharePoint in the section of permission management. And I look forward to in the next lesson, where we will proceed with another related topic to permission management, that is, the creation and management SharePoint groups. I'm waiting for you in the next lesson.